My name is Michael, 32 years old, and I own a beautiful 3-bedroom house in Austin that I worked hard to purchase after years of saving. When my father remarried after the divorce, I never imagined his new stepdaughter Jessica would one day show up 7 months pregnant at my doorstep. But what started as temporary family help quickly spiraled into outrageous demands for my master bedroom and much more. If you've ever had family try to take advantage of your generosity, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and stick around to see how I finally stood my ground and reclaimed my home. I grew up in a middle-class family in Chicago, where my parents instilled in me the value of hard work and independence from an early age. Throughout high school, I discovered my passion for computer science and spent countless hours teaching myself programming languages while my classmates were out partying. This dedication continued through college, where I worked 2 part-time jobs to pay my tuition and living expenses. Weekends at the campus tech lab and nights at a local restaurant meant little social life, but I was focused on my future. After graduating with honors, I landed an internship at a promising tech startup in Chicago. My willingness to put in extra hours and solve complex problems quickly caught the attention of senior management. Within 3 years, I had worked my way up to senior developer, but I had bigger dreams. When an opportunity arose at a major tech company in Austin, I jumped at the chance and relocated. The move to Austin proved to be the right decision. My career flourished, and after 2 years of careful saving and building my credit, I achieved one of my biggest dreams, purchasing my own home. Not just any home, but a beautiful 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood with mature oak trees lining the streets. The master bedroom became my sanctuary with its ensuite bathroom and spacious walk-in closet. I converted the 2nd bedroom into a home office, where I often worked late into the night on freelance projects, and the 3rd bedroom became a comfortable guest room for the occasional visitor. My house represented everything I had worked for: independence, security, and a space entirely my own after years of roommates and cramped apartments. I took pride in every corner, from the kitchen, with granite countertops, to the wooden deck I had built myself in the backyard. This was my achievement earned through years of sacrifice and dedication. My personal life had been relatively stable despite the upheaval in my family. When I was 20, my parents announced they were divorcing after 25 years of marriage. While not entirely surprising given the tension that had been building for years, it still shook the foundation of what I considered family. My mother moved to Florida to be closer to her sister, while my father remained in Chicago. Just 2 years after the divorce, my father called to tell me he was remarrying. Sandra was 15 years younger than him and had a daughter named Jessica who was 18 at the time. I met them at the small wedding ceremony and tried to be supportive despite my reservations. Sandra seemed nice enough, always trying to include me in conversations, but Jessica made little effort to connect. She spent most of the wedding texting friends and rolling her eyes whenever family traditions were mentioned. Over the next few years, our relationship remained distant but cordial. I would see Jessica at holiday gatherings when I visited Chicago. She had dropped out of community college after 1 semester, claiming it wasn't her thing, and cycled through a series of retail jobs, never staying anywhere longer than a few months. There was always some drama: a manager who didn't appreciate her coworkers, who were jealous, or scheduling that didn't accommodate her social life. Despite her perpetually challenging circumstances, Jessica maintained an expensive lifestyle. Her Instagram showed constant shopping trips, concert tickets, and nights out with friends. My father mentioned occasionally that he and Sandra had helped her out of financial jams, but I kept my opinions to myself. It wasn't my business how they chose to support her. About a year ago, Jessica started dating Ryan, a 25-year-old self-proclaimed musician who had a part-time job at a record store. The few times I met him during family gatherings, he seemed more interested in my father's liquor cabinet than making conversation. I noticed the concerned glances my father and Sandra exchanged when Ryan talked about his band getting close to a record deal while having accomplished little beyond a few local gigs in 7 years. 7 months ago, during a family video call, Jessica and Ryan announced she was pregnant. My father looked shocked. Sandra forced a smile, and I offered congratulations while inwardly wondering how Jessica would handle the responsibility of parenthood when she could barely maintain steady employment. In the following months, I heard updates about baby shower plans and nursery themes, but also whispers from my father about Jessica's continued financial struggles. Then came the call that would upend my peaceful life. My father sounded uncomfortable as he explained that Jessica and Ryan had been evicted from their apartment for failing to pay rent for 3 months. They had nowhere to go, and with the baby coming in just 2 months, they needed a stable environment. Sandra's mother was already staying in their spare bedroom due to health issues. "Michael, son, I know this is a lot to ask," my father said hesitantly, "but Jessica really needs a place to stay until she gets back on her feet. It would just be temporary, a month or 2 at most. You have that nice guest room that's sitting empty." I felt the weight of family obligation pressing down on me. Despite our distant relationship, Jessica was family now, and she was pregnant. Surely I could handle a month or 2 of disruption to help out during this crisis. Against the small voice of caution in my head, I agreed to let Jessica stay temporarily. That decision would soon prove to be one I deeply regretted. After agreeing to let Jessica stay, I spent the weekend preparing the guest bedroom. I purchased new linens, cleared space in the bathroom cabinet for her toiletries, and emptied a kitchen cupboard for any special foods she might need during her pregnancy. I even bought a small desk and chair in case she wanted a workspace for job searching or online courses. My goal was to make her feel welcome, while also setting up a space that would function well for her temporary stay. When Jessica arrived with my father helping carry her bags, I was immediately concerned by the sheer volume of possessions she brought for what was supposed to be a short stay. 3 large suitcases of clothes, multiple boxes of personal items, and several bags of beauty products seemed excessive for someone staying, just until she found a new place. Nevertheless, I helped carry everything to the guest room and gave her a tour of the house, explaining where everything was and how various appliances worked. For the first few days, Jessica seemed genuinely appreciative. She thanked me for breakfast when I made extra for her, and kept her personal items confined to the guest room. But by the end of the first week, troubling signs began to emerge. I came home from work to find dishes piled in the sink, wet towels on the bathroom floor, and Jessica watching TV surrounded by empty snack containers. When I gently mentioned the house rules about cleaning up after yourself, she apologized and blamed pregnancy fatigue. "Being pregnant is so much harder than anyone tells you," she said, rubbing her stomach. "Sometimes I just don't have the energy to walk all the way to the kitchen or bathroom." I tried to be understanding, reminding myself this was temporary, but similar instances continued to occur. I began finding food missing from my carefully planned meal prep containers in the refrigerator. When confronted, Jessica casually mentioned she had a craving and didn't think I'd mind. About 10 days into her stay, Jessica approached me while I was working from home. "Michael, I really appreciate everything you're doing, but the guest room is so small. There's hardly any storage space and I feel cramped, which isn't good for my stress levels during pregnancy." I was taken aback but tried to accommodate. "I can clear out the hall closet for some of your things if that would help." "That would be great," she replied, but her tone suggested this was merely a temporary fix for a bigger problem. The following weekend brought another complication, Ryan. Although I had agreed to let Jessica stay, I had made no such arrangement for her boyfriend. Yet he arrived Friday evening with an overnight bag and made himself at home. I returned from running errands to find him lounging on my couch, feet up on my coffee table, helping himself to my craft beer collection. "Ryan's just visiting Jessica," explained when she noticed my expression. "He misses me so much when we're apart." What was meant to be a weekend visit extended to Sunday, then Monday, then the entire week. Ryan treated my home like a hotel, leaving wet towels on the bathroom floor, helping himself to food in the refrigerator, and even drinking from an expensive bottle of whiskey I had been saving for a special occasion. He played video games loudly late into the night and invited friends over without asking when I was at work. After a particularly disruptive evening when Ryan's loud music prevented me from focusing on an important project deadline, I decided it was time to establish clearer boundaries. I sat them both down at the kitchen table. "I'm happy to help you out during this difficult time, Jessica. I began carefully, but we need to discuss some house rules. I need quiet in the evenings for work, and I'd appreciate if Ryan could limit his visits to weekends. Also, please ask before inviting other people over or using my personal items." Ryan scoffed and rolled his eyes, but Jessica immediately teared up. "I can't believe you're being so controlling when I'm pregnant and stressed. Ryan helps me when you're busy working. Don't you care about your niece or nephew?" Her emotional response caught me off guard, and I found myself backing down, agreeing that Ryan could visit but asking them to be more considerate about noise and guests. As I left for work the next morning feeling like I'd somehow been manipulated, despite making reasonable requests, I overheard Jessica on the phone. "Yeah, don't worry about finding a new place right away," she was saying to someone, presumably Ryan. "We can stay here longer. Michael has plenty of space. Maybe you could just move in permanently. He's at work all day anyway, he'd hardly notice." That conversation troubled me deeply, but I tried to focus on work and give Jessica the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps she was just venting or being optimistic. Surely she remembered this was a temporary arrangement. Over the next week, Jessica's demands grew more frequent and intrusive. She complained about the temperature in the house being too cold for her pregnancy comfort. She asked me to adjust my morning bathroom schedule because morning sickness made her need immediate access. She requested specific groceries, then barely touched them, leading to waste. One evening as I was preparing dinner, my phone rang with Sandra's name on the screen. I hadn't spoken directly to my stepmother much since Jessica moved in. "Michael, I just wanted to call and thank you personally for being so generous with Jessica," she said warmly. "It means so much to your father and me to know she has a safe place during this important time." "It's temporary," I reminded her. "Just until she finds a new place." Of course," Sandra replied, though something in her tone suggested she didn't believe that. "You know, with the baby coming, she really needs a support system. Your father and I would take her in, but with my mother's health issues. You understand how family needs to stick together, right?" The conversation left me with an uneasy feeling, as though the goalposts of our arrangement were shifting without my input. That night I lay awake wondering how I had gone from offering temporary shelter to a pregnant stepsister to apparently being expected to provide indefinite housing for her growing family. Little did I know the situation was about to get much worse. 2 weeks into Jessica's stay, I returned from an early morning run to find the living room completely rearranged. The couch had been moved to the opposite wall, my reading chair was now awkwardly positioned in a corner, and the coffee table had been pushed against the window. Several of my framed photographs had been taken down, replaced with Jessica's decorative items, inspirational quotes printed on canvas, and fairy lights strung across the bookshelf. "What happened in here?" I asked Jessica, who was calmly eating cereal at the kitchen island. She glanced up casually. "The other arrangement was blocking the natural flow of the room. This is much better for feng shui." She patted her stomach. "Positive energy is really important for the baby." Before I could formulate a response that wouldn't sound unnecessarily confrontational to a pregnant woman, she continued. "Plus, this gives more space for the baby swing and playpen we'll need to set up soon." The casual mention of permanent baby furniture in my living room sent alarm bells ringing, but I was late for a meeting and didn't have time to address it properly. That evening I returned home to an even bigger shock. Ryan's beaten-up Nissan was parked in my driveway, and when I entered the house, I found him setting up a gaming console at my television while Jessica watched from the couch. "What's going on?" I asked, noting several duffel bags and boxes stacked in the entryway. Jessica smiled as though this were perfectly normal. "Ryan's lease was up, so he's going to stay here too. It makes sense since the baby is coming in 2 months. We need to be together to prepare." I placed my laptop bag down slowly, trying to maintain composure. "Jessica, we never discussed Ryan moving in. This was supposed to be a temporary arrangement for you while you found a new place. But we need to save money for the baby," she countered, her voice taking on a whining quality. "Paying for 2 separate places is a waste. Besides, I need help during my pregnancy. You're never home because of work, so who's going to take care of me?" Ryan finally looked up from the tangle of cords he was sorting. "Dude, it's not a big deal. I'm quiet as a mouse. You won't even know I'm here." This statement was laughable given his track record of late-night gaming sessions and loud music. That night was tense, with Ryan acting as though he already lived there, helping himself to my food and monopolizing the television. I retreated to my bedroom early, texting my friend Taylor about the situation. "You need to put your foot down," Taylor replied. "This is going to get worse if you don't establish boundaries now." The next morning I resolved to have a frank discussion with Jessica. I found her examining my master bedroom while I was getting ready for work. "This room is so much bigger than the guest room," she remarked, running her hand along the edge of my dresser. "And the attached bathroom is perfect." I nodded cautiously. I specifically chose this house for the master suite. It was a big selling point. Jessica turned to face me, her expression suddenly serious. "Michael, Ryan and I have been talking. With the baby coming, we really need more space than the guest room provides. We think it would make sense for us to take the master bedroom." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "You want my bedroom?" "Well, it makes logical sense," she continued, gaining confidence. "You're just one person, and there will be 3 of us. The baby needs its own nursery area, and your room has the attached bathroom, which would be perfect for middle-of-the-night feedings and changes. You could move to the guest room since you're gone most of the day anyway." The audacity of the request left me momentarily speechless. Jessica interpreted my silence as consideration. "We'd need to move soon to get everything set up before the baby arrives. Ryan could help you move your things this weekend." I found my voice. "Absolutely not. This is my house, Jessica. The master bedroom is mine. I've already been generous offering the guest room temporarily." Her face immediately crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't believe you're being so selfish. This is about your niece or nephew. Don't you care about the baby having a proper space? The guest room barely fits a crib." Ryan, who had apparently been listening from the hallway, stepped into the room. "Man, it's just a bedroom. Why are you being so uptight about it? Jessica's pregnant, she needs the space more than you do." I stood my ground despite the growing discomfort of being made to feel like the villain. "I'm sorry, but the answer is no. The guest room is all I offered, and that was meant to be temporary." Jessica stormed out in tears, and Ryan gave me a disgusted look before following her. The rest of the day was filled with slammed doors and pointed silence. That evening, my phone rang. It was my father. "Michael, Jessica called us very upset," he began without preamble. "She says you're making things difficult for her during her pregnancy." I explained the situation, expecting my father to see the reasonableness of my position. Instead, he sighed heavily. "Son, I know it's an inconvenience, but family helps family during tough times. Your stepsister is going through a lot right now. Would it really be such a hardship to let them use the larger room for a while, just until they get on their feet after the baby comes?" The conversation left me feeling gaslit. Was I really being unreasonable for not wanting to give up my master bedroom in my own house to a stepsister I barely knew and her unemployed boyfriend? My work began to suffer as the home situation consumed my thoughts. I found it difficult to concentrate during meetings and missed deadlines I would normally have completed easily. Over the next few days, the tension in the house was palpable. Jessica left pregnancy books and baby clothes conspicuously placed around the house, including in my bedroom when I was at work. Ryan's presence became more permanent, with his toiletries taking over the main bathroom and his shoes piled by the front door. I met Taylor for dinner, desperate for an outside perspective. "They're taking advantage of you," Taylor said bluntly after hearing the latest developments. "You need to set firm boundaries before they completely take over your life. This isn't about family anymore. It's about respect, and they're showing you none." Deep down, I knew Taylor was right, but family obligation weighed heavily on me. I returned home that night to find Jessica had ordered an expensive crib and had it delivered to my house. The large box sat in the middle of the living room like a statement. "Where exactly do you plan to put that?" I asked, eyeing the box. Jessica smiled brightly as though our argument had never happened. "I was thinking we could convert your office into a nursery. You could set up a desk in the living room instead." I felt the last thread of my patience begin to fray. "Jessica, this has gone too far. You're making plans that involve taking over my entire house without any regard for me. This was supposed to be a temporary arrangement." She waved her hand dismissively. "Family helps family, Michael. You have all this space just for yourself. Don't be so selfish." That word, selfish, had been thrown at me repeatedly since Jessica arrived. Was it selfish to want to maintain the home I had worked so hard to create, to protect the sanctuary I had built for myself after years of sacrifice? as I went to bed that night, hearing Ryan's loud laughter from the guest room as he video chatted with friends, I began to realize that setting boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary for my own well-being. Little did I know the real breaking point was yet to come. The following Tuesday, I left work early with a pounding migraine. The stress of the home situation, combined with an intense project deadline, had taken a physical toll, and all I wanted was to lie down in my dark, quiet bedroom. I texted Jessica that I was coming home sick so she wouldn't be startled by my early arrival. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Ryan's car parked in my usual spot. Irritated but too exhausted to care, I parked on the street and made my way inside. The house was unusually quiet as I entered, but something felt off. Items had been moved in the living room and boxes I didn't recognize were stacked by the staircase. As I approached my bedroom, I heard hushed voices and the sound of drawers opening and closing. I pushed open the door to find a shocking scene. Jessica and Ryan were in my master bedroom with my clothes partially removed from the dresser and closet. Jessica was directing Ryan as he assembled a bassinet in the corner of the room. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, my migraine momentarily forgotten in the surge of disbelief. Jessica jumped slightly, but quickly composed herself. "Oh, Michael, you're home early. We decided to go ahead with the bedroom switch. You've been so stressed lately, we thought we'd help by moving things along." Ryan barely looked up from his task. "Your stuff's already half moved to the guest room. We figured you'd be at work all day, so we'd surprise you with a fait accompli." He sounded proud of the French phrase, as though it somehow justified their actions. I stood in the doorway, stunned by the audacity. "You're moving my things without permission, in my own house." Jessica sat on my bed, now apparently claiming it as hers. "Michael, be reasonable. We need this space more than you do. The baby will be here in less than 2 months, and we need to be prepared." "This is my house," I said firmly. "You can't just decide to take over my bedroom because you want it." "Actually," Ryan interjected, "we've made several decisions that we think are best for everyone." He gestured to a notepad on the nightstand. Jessica made a list. Feeling as though I had stepped into an alternate reality, I picked up the notepad. The list included convert home office to nursery, Michael to purchase crib and changing table, adjust house temperature to pregnancy-appropriate levels, Ryan's band can practice in garage twice weekly, visitor parking spot for Ryan's friends, baby shower to be hosted at house next month. The migraine pounded behind my eyes as I processed what I was reading. "This is insane," I said finally. "You're planning to completely take over my house without even discussing it with me, and you expect me to pay for baby furniture." Jessica looked at me as though I was being deliberately obtuse. "You're going to be an uncle, Michael. Of course you'd want to help with the baby expenses, and it's not taking over, it's sharing. Family shares." "How long exactly are you planning to share my house?" I asked, already suspecting the answer. Jessica and Ryan exchanged glances before she replied. "Well, we've given up the old apartment completely. I told the landlord we're moving out permanently. With the baby coming, we need to save money for at least the first year or two." "2 years," I interrupted incredulously. Ryan shrugged. "Could be longer. I'm thinking about quitting my part-time job to focus on my music and being a dad. We need to be practical." "Sandra thinks you should help financially with the baby expenses too," Jessica added, as though this were a perfectly reasonable expectation. "You make good money and don't have any real expenses besides the mortgage." In that moment, something inside me snapped. The weeks of escalating demands, boundary violations, and emotional manipulation crystallized into perfect clarity. I was being completely taken advantage of, and it would never end unless I put a stop to it. "Get out of my bedroom," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage and frustration building inside me. "Put my things back exactly as you found them, and get out." Jessica's eyes widened at my tone. "You can't speak to me like that, I'm pregnant." "Being pregnant doesn't give you the right to take over someone else's home," I replied. "This has gone too far, Jessica. Way too far." Ryan stood up, attempting to look intimidating as he approached me. "You need to think about your family obligations, Michael. Your dad won't be happy about you treating Jessica this way." My family obligations don't include giving up my entire life and home to people who have shown zero respect for me or my property, I responded, refusing to back down. I've been more than generous, and you've taken advantage at every turn. The argument escalated with Jessica crying about family loyalty and Ryan making veiled threats about how my father would react. Eventually, I grabbed my keys and left the house, unable to tolerate another minute of their entitled behavior. I drove to Taylor's apartment where I explained the situation through a haze of anger and disbelief. "You need to take back control," Taylor said after listening to the whole story. "This is beyond normal family help. They're trying to completely take over your life." I spent the night on Taylor's couch, my phone buzzing repeatedly with texts from Jessica demanding I bring home specific takeout food for her pregnancy cravings and asking when I'd be back because the internet was running slowly and needed to be reset. Lying there in the dark, I realized Taylor was right. This wasn't going to improve on its own. Jessica and Ryan had shown they had no intention of respecting my boundaries or my home. They would continue taking more and more until there was nothing left of my space or peace. The temporary arrangement had become a permanent imposition, and their demands would only grow once the baby arrived. By morning, my resolve had hardened. I had been a doormat for weeks, trying to be the bigger person, trying to help family in need. But family help shouldn't mean complete self-sacrifice. I had worked too hard for too long to let everything I'd built be taken away by people who didn't respect me. It was time to reclaim my home and my self-respect, no matter how uncomfortable the confrontation might be. As I dressed in Taylor's borrowed clothes, I received one final text from Jessica. "When you stop being dramatic and come home, we need to discuss painting the master bedroom. I'm thinking light yellow for the baby's corner." That text confirmed everything. There would be no reasoning with Jessica or Ryan. They simply saw me as a resource to be exploited. The only solution was to be as coldly clear and firm as they had been entitled. I made several phone calls, stopped at a hardware store and a printing shop, and prepared for the confrontation that was long overdue. I returned home at exactly 6 that evening, having carefully planned my approach. Jessica was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I walked in, and she immediately launched into complaints about my absence. "Finally. Where have you been? I needed you to fix the Wi-Fi last night, and Ryan couldn't find the password to your premium streaming services." I ignored her comments and placed my bags on the counter. "Where's Ryan? I need to speak with both of you." "He's in the shower," she replied, eyeing the bags curiously. "What's all that?" "Family meeting in the living room in 15 minutes, I said calmly. "Please text your mother and my father. I'd like them on video call for this discussion." Jessica looked alarmed by my businesslike tone but nodded slowly. I spent the next quarter hour setting up my materials, and by the time Ryan emerged and my parents appeared on the tablet screen, I was completely prepared. "Thank you all for joining this conversation," I began formally. "There have been some misunderstandings about the living arrangements in this house that need to be clarified immediately." I placed a small Ziploc bag on the coffee table containing 2 new house keys. "First, I've changed the locks on the house. These are the only keys that will be provided to Jessica. Ryan is not on the lease or rental agreement and has no legal right to independent access to my property." Ryan's face darkened with anger, but I continued before he could interrupt. "Second, I've prepared a written agreement outlining the terms of Jessica's temporary stay." I handed copies to Jessica and Ryan, holding one up to the camera for my father and Sandra to see. "This document clearly states that Jessica, and only Jessica, has exactly 30 days from today to find alternative accommodation. This is a legally binding notice to vacate." "30 days," Sandra exclaimed from the screen. "But the baby is due in less than 60 days. You can't throw your pregnant stepsister out." "I'm not throwing anyone out," I replied evenly. "I'm providing 30 days of continued housing, along with clear expectations after having my generosity repeatedly taken advantage of." I proceeded to methodically list each boundary violation: the attempt to take over my bedroom without permission, the planning to convert my office to a nursery, the expectation that I would finance baby furniture, Ryan essentially moving in, without consent, and the overall disrespect for my home and property. "I've been more than generous," I concluded. "But my generosity has been met with increasing demands and complete disregard for the fact that this is my house which I worked for years to afford. The room was silent when I finished. Jessica's face had gone from shocked to tearful to angry during my recitation. Ryan was the first to respond. "You can't be serious," he scoffed. "You're going to put your pregnant stepsister on the street because you're too selfish to share a little space. What kind of person does that?" "I'm not putting anyone on the street," I corrected him. "I'm giving 30 days notice, which is more than generous given that there was never an agreement for long-term housing. And, speaking of agreements," I turned to face Ryan directly, "you have never been an agreed-upon guest in this home. Effective immediately, you are no longer welcome as an overnight visitor." Ryan stood up aggressively. "You can't do that. Jessica needs me here." "This is my property," I stated calmly. "I absolutely can determine who stays in it. You have 1 hour to collect any belongings you've brought here, and then you need to leave." My father's voice came through the tablet, stern and disappointed. "Michael, I raised you better than this. Family looks out for family. Jessica is in a vulnerable position right now." "I agree that family looks out for family," I responded, "which is why I offered Jessica temporary housing during a crisis. But looking out for family doesn't mean allowing myself to be completely taken advantage of. It doesn't mean giving up my bedroom, my office, financing baby furniture, or housing her boyfriend indefinitely." Sandra was openly crying now. "How can you be so cold? This is your niece or nephew we're talking about." "I'm being practical, not cold," I clarified. "I've prepared a list of local resources for pregnant women in need of housing assistance. I've included contact information for several affordable apartment complexes that offer short-term leases. I'm willing to help Jessica move when she finds a suitable place, but I am not willing to have my entire life upended indefinitely." I then presented the printed list of house rules that would apply for Jessica's remaining 30 days. Guest room only, no access to master bedroom or office, cleaning up after herself in all common areas, no crime. Overnight guests, no rearranging furniture or decor, no loud noise after 9 p.m., respect for my property and belongings. "These rules are non-negotiable," I stated. "Any violation will result in the immediate termination of the 30-day grace period." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica stared at the paper in her hands, tears streaming down her face. Ryan looked as though he wanted to punch something. My father and Sandra appeared stunned by my firm stance, clearly having expected me to back down as I had done repeatedly over the past weeks. "You're being incredibly cruel," Sandra finally said. "I never thought you were this type of person, Michael." "I'm being clear about my boundaries after they've been repeatedly violated," I corrected her. "I've been patient and generous, but that generosity has been taken advantage of consistently. I'm not obligated to sacrifice my entire life and home indefinitely." Ryan grabbed his jacket and stormed toward the door. "This is bullshit. Your family's gonna remember how you treated them when you needed something someday." After he slammed the door behind him, Jessica locked herself in the guest room, refusing to continue the conversation. My father ended the video call with a curt, "We'll discuss this later," and Sandra's tearful face disappeared from the screen. I sat alone in my living room, feeling a complex mixture of emotions. There was guilt, certainly. I had been raised to believe that family should be helped at all costs. But beneath that was a profound sense of relief. For the first time in weeks, I had stood up for myself and my right to the home I had worked so hard to create. Later that evening, my phone rang with my father's number. I braced myself for the continued guilt trip. "I'm disappointed in you, Michael," he began without preamble. "Sandra is extremely upset and Jessica is devastated." "I understand you're disappointed," I replied calmly. "But I need you to understand that I've been more than generous. Jessica and Ryan were planning to live here indefinitely, take over my bedroom and office, and expected me to finance their lifestyle and baby expenses. That goes far beyond reasonable family help." The conversation continued in circles, with my father insisting I was being unnecessarily harsh and me standing firm on my boundaries. Eventually, we ended the call with nothing resolved except the clear understanding that I would not be backing down. The atmosphere in the house that night was icy. Jessica remained in the guest room, only emerging once to get water from the kitchen, pointedly ignoring me as she passed. As I reclaimed my slightly rearranged bedroom, removing the partially assembled bassinet and returning my belongings to their proper places, I felt like a stranger in my own home. But I also felt something else, the quiet satisfaction of finally standing up for myself and what was rightfully mine. The week following our confrontation was tense, to say the least. Jessica implemented a cold shoulder strategy, passing through common areas of the house like a ghost, refusing to acknowledge my presence. When absolutely necessary to communicate, she would leave notes on the kitchen counter with terse messages like "mail came" or "using shower at 7. True to the new rules, Ryan no longer stayed overnight, though he would visit during the day when I was at work. I installed a small security camera in the living room, not to spy, but to ensure my property was being respected in my absence. Through this, I learned that Ryan had taken to badmouthing me extensively during his visits, calling me every name in the book, while Jessica nodded in agreement. Despite the 30-day notice to find new housing, Jessica made minimal effort in the first week. The resource list I had provided remained untouched on the coffee table, and when I asked casually if she'd made any calls, she muttered something about looking online before retreating to the guest room. I began documenting everything: the lack of apartment hunting, the condition of the guest room, the times Ryan visited, creating a paper trail in case the situation escalated further. I hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but Taylor had wisely suggested having evidence if Jessica refused to leave after the 30 days. The family pressure campaign began in earnest. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives I rarely heard from, all suddenly concerned about Jessica's situation. My aunt in Phoenix called to tell me how disappointed she was in my lack of family values. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years texted to ask how I could sleep at night, putting a pregnant woman on the street. It became clear that Jessica and my father had been sharing a carefully edited version of events that cast me as the villain. The most disturbing call came from my father 10 days after the confrontation. His voice was cold and formal as he informed me that if I didn't rectify the situation with Jessica, he would be removing me from his will. "I never raised you to be this selfish," he said. "Your mother and I sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay family obligation." During that call, a piece of information slipped out that suddenly made everything click into place. My father mentioned that he had promised Jessica she could stay with you until she got on her feet after the baby. "Wait," I interrupted. "You promised her, before even asking me?" There was a telling pause before he replied, "I knew you would want to help family. You have that big house all to yourself." That conversation revealed the truth. This had never been about a temporary emergency arrangement. From the very beginning, my father and Sandra had planned for Jessica to move in with me long-term, perhaps permanently, without bothering to consult me about it. I had been manipulated from the start. Seeking perspective, I called my mother in Florida. Though we weren't as close as we once had been, she had always been the more practical parent. After explaining the situation, I was surprised by her supportive response. "Your father always had a blind spot when it came to enabling," she said with a sigh. "He did the same thing with your cousin Mark, letting him live rent-free in the basement for 3 years. Some people need a push to stand on their own feet." Her validation was healing, confirming that I wasn't being unreasonable. "You worked hard for your home, Michael," she added. "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting what you've built." Meanwhile, Jessica continued her attempts to regain control through emotional manipulation. She would groan loudly when passing me, rubbing her stomach and commenting on how the stress was affecting the baby. She left pregnancy complication pamphlets, conspicuously placed around the house, highlighted passages about how stress and housing insecurity could cause premature labor. I maintained my boundaries while still providing reasonable support. I continued to stock healthy foods, kept the house at a comfortable temperature, and respected her privacy in the guest room. But I remained firm on the 30-day timeline and the house rules. Around day 15, something unexpected happened. Sandra called me directly without my father on the line. "Michael," she began hesitantly, "I owe you an apology." I nearly dropped the phone in shock. "I came to check on Jessica yesterday and saw how she was treating your home. The guest room is a disaster. and she was completely dismissive when I suggested she start looking for apartments. Sandra paused before continuing. This isn't the first time she's taken advantage of people's generosity. Before she moved in with you, she had been evicted from 2 previous apartments for similar reasons. Sandra went on to explain that Jessica had a pattern of manipulative behavior that they had enabled for years. We thought having a baby would make her more responsible, but it seems to have made her feel even more entitled to others' help. This conversation marked a turning point. With Sandra's unexpected support, Jessica finally began making efforts to find new housing. She connected with a church group that helped expectant mothers and found an affordable 1-bedroom apartment in a decent neighborhood about 15 minutes away. When the time came to help Jessica move her belongings to the new apartment, I rented a small moving truck and assisted with the heavy lifting, despite the lingering tension between us. Ryan was notably absent during the moving process, having apparently found temporary housing with a band member. As we unloaded the last of her boxes at the new apartment, my father arrived to help with setting up. His demeanor toward me remained cold, but there was a hint of resignation in his expression. The threat about the will had not been mentioned again. "You're really going through with this," he said as Jessica arranged her belongings in the small living room. "I'm following through on the boundaries I set," I corrected him, "and I'm still helping, just in a way that maintains my own space and sanity." He shook his head slightly but didn't argue further. Before leaving, I gave Jessica a housewarming gift, a grocery store gift card, and a basic toolkit. She accepted them with a stiff thanks but couldn't quite meet my eyes. As I drove home to my blessedly quiet house, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over me. For the first time in nearly 2 months, I could fully relax in my own space, without walking on eggshells or worrying about what boundaries would be crossed next. 3 weeks later, I received a text from my father informing me that Jessica had given birth to a healthy baby girl. Ryan had been absent for the delivery, having apparently gone to a music festival the weekend she went into labor. The subtext was clear. I was expected to feel guilty for not being there to support her in Ryan's absence. Instead of taking the bait, I sent flowers to the hospital with a simple card congratulating her on the new arrival. It was a gesture that acknowledged the family connection without conceding the boundaries I had fought so hard to establish. Later that week, I received an unexpected text from Jessica herself. "Ryan left. Said he wasn't ready to be a dad after all. Maybe you were right about some things." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of her poor choices that I was likely to get. I responded with a simple message of support for her and the baby, without reopening the door to financial or housing assistance. The drama that had consumed my life for months finally began to fade, leaving me with a newfound appreciation for my peaceful home and the importance of standing up for myself, even when it meant being labeled as the villain. Sometimes the coldest responses are the most necessary ones. 6 months have passed since the tumultuous period when Jessica lived in my house, and life has settled into a new normal. My home is once again my sanctuary, peaceful, organized, and arranged exactly as I like it. The master bedroom remains mine. The home office continues to be where I pursue my professional goals, and the guest room has hosted exactly what it was intended for: occasional guests who respect boundaries. What I couldn't have predicted was how the situation with Jessica would ultimately evolve. About 3 months after moving out, she sent me a message that caught me completely off guard, an actual apology. "I've been thinking a lot about how I behaved when I stayed with you," she wrote. "After Ryan left, I realized I'd been making a lot of bad choices and taking advantage of people who were trying to help me. I'm sorry for how I treated you and your home." The message came as a surprise, but an even bigger surprise followed a few weeks later when my father called to invite me to meet my niece, now 5 months old. Jessica had named her Lily, and despite my complicated feelings about the situation, I was curious about the newest member of our extended family. The Jessica I met that day seemed different from the entitled young woman who had tried to take over my house. Parenthood and abandonment had apparently forced a kind of reckoning. She was living in the same small apartment, working part-time at a daycare center that allowed her to bring Lily, and taking online courses in early childhood education. Ryan only came back once to pick up his guitar, she told me as we sat in her modest living room. He's in Nashville now, supposedly pursuing his music career. No child support, no contact. I felt a twinge of sympathy, but was careful not to let it translate into offers of financial help. Instead, I focused on building a relationship with Lily, a cheerful, chunky baby with curious eyes who seemed fascinated by my watch. Over the following months, I established boundaries that allowed me to be part of Lily's life without becoming Jessica's safety net. I would visit every few weeks, sometimes bringing a small gift for the baby or taking them out for lunch. When Jessica hinted about financial struggles, I would point her toward resources rather than opening my wallet. The family dynamics had fundamentally changed. My father, who had initially been furious about my abandonment of Jessica, gradually came to respect the boundaries I had established. During a family dinner 3 months ago, he actually acknowledged I might have been right. Jessica seems more independent now than she ever was before, he admitted. Maybe she needed to stand on her own feet. Coming from my father, this was tantamount to a full apology. Our relationship, which had been strained to the breaking point, slowly began to heal. The threatened disinheritance was never mentioned again. Sandra surprisingly became something of an ally. Having witnessed Jessica's pattern of behavior more directly than anyone else, she seemed relieved that someone had finally enforced consequences. She would occasionally call me with updates about Jessica's progress, noting with approval the small steps toward maturity she was observing. The entire experience taught me valuable lessons that I carry into all my relationships now. I learned that establishing clear boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy interactions. True generosity doesn't mean being taken advantage of, and helping others doesn't require sacrificing your own well-being. Perhaps most importantly, I learned to distinguish between helping and enabling. Providing Jessica with resources to find her own housing helped her grow. Allowing her to take over my home would have enabled her continued dependence and entitlement. My friendship with Taylor grew stronger through the ordeal. Having someone who supported my right to set boundaries while the rest of my family was pressuring me to concede was invaluable. We now have a standing dinner date every other week, and Taylor remains my voice of reason when family matters become complicated. Professionally, I've thrived since reclaiming the peace of my home environment. Without the constant stress and disruption, I was able to focus on an important project that led to a significant promotion. The home office that Jessica had planned to convert to a nursery became the space where I developed a software solution that earned me recognition throughout the company. As for Jessica, her journey toward responsibility continues with small steps forward and occasional slides backward. She still sometimes makes questionable decisions, but she's learning to deal with the consequences rather than expecting others to rescue her. Watching her struggle yet slowly improve has given me a new perspective on personal growth. It rarely follows a straight line, but each step counts. In my most reflective moments, I realized that standing firm actually helped everyone involved. Jessica needed to learn independence. My father needed to recognize the damage his enabling was doing, and I needed to value my own boundaries. What seemed like a cold response in the moment was actually the most compassionate choice for everyone's long-term well-being. My house remains my haven, the physical manifestation of years of hard work and discipline. The master bedroom is still mine, though now there's a small basket of toys in the corner for when Lily visits. It's a reminder that family relationships can evolve and heal, but only when built on a foundation of mutual respect. If there's one thing I've learned from this experience, it's that protecting what you've built isn't selfish. It's necessary for authentic relationships that stand the test of time. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable their worst tendencies, even if that makes you temporarily unpopular. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Thanks for listening, and remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's essential for your well-being and ultimately better for everyone involved. Share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to protect their own space and peace.